All right, so last we left off still on Mishnah Aleph in Pirkei Avos. So the argument we were trying to make was in the first four words, really. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. What did that imply? So the first part of the implication is that we know that he didn't get the Torah Shebechtav. If the Mishnah is telling us Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai, we assume that the Torah that he received is the Torah Shebal Peh. So he really got two Torahs, right? The written one and the oral one, which he was told to keep oral, and that is what we have in front of us now written down, is the Torah that he received orally at Har Sinai. And we explained that oral Torah, the purpose of it was essentially to explain the written Torah. If you tried to live as a biblical Jew without the oral Torah, you would have no idea what you're doing. You wouldn't know that tefillin are supposed to be square. You wouldn't know what a pre-Eitz Hadar is. There's lots of complications to try to do that.
The Jewish movement that did that just followed the Torah and
So even the very strictly literalist, even the Samaritans, forget about the Samaritans, but for sure the Sadducees, the Essenes, everybody has to interpret the Bible. The question is, how much do you rely on your own deduction versus how much do you rely on tradition and Masorah? So Rabbinic, quote-unquote, Judaism, Pharisaic Judaism at the time says, look, we have a Masorah, we have the Torah Shebal Peh, and the Torah Shebal Peh tells me that when the verse says, U'mimacharas HaShabbos, it doesn't literally mean after Shabbos, it means after the first day of Pesach, right? How do you know that? I know that because I have this Masorah, I have a Torah Shebal Peh. The other part that's included in this Torah Shebal Peh, and we honed in on the word Misinai. We asked the question, if the purpose of this first Mishnah and really the whole first parak is to trace the chain of tradition all the way back to God, then why are we not saying Moshe got the Torah from God, right? And we answered that word Misinai is sort of a clue that there's more to it than just the explanation of the Torah Shebechtav. There's also Halacha Moshe Misinai, which is a whole independent category where you have stuff that you would not know from any sort of logical deduction. You wouldn't know it any other way than the fact that Moshe got this halacha, and that halacha has the same bearing, as the same weight and importance as if it was written in the Torah. So there are a number of examples of what halacha Moshe Misinai is, but the purpose of writing it this way, that Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, is to tell you that he didn't just get the explanation of the Torah Shebechtav, he also got Halacha Moshe Misinai Torah Shebal Peh. So that's where we've gotten to so far. So I want to add a little bit more context, and I know we talked about it briefly, but the historical context is important. In 135, there was the Bar Kokhba revolt, and then the absolutely tragic destruction of basically Yerushalayim and all of Judaism at the time in that area, because the Romans put down the rebellion, and the rabbis had to move north to Tzipori, to Yavne, to wherever, and try to maintain Judaism. The other groups of Jews, right? The Sadducees basically are no more after, let's say, the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. The Christians are now starting to really break off. They didn't participate. They didn't join the Jews in fighting against Rome. So now there's a very clear delineation. The Jews have to pay the tax. The Christians do not. So it's starting to become clearer and clearer who's on what team. Also around that time, meaning the beginning of the 2nd century, is when the Gospels, which are written, let's say, the end of the 1st century, the 70 through the year 100.
Back that statement up.
Yeah.
The Christians didn't have to pay the tax because the Christians were one of many very small.
Are they Jews or are they not Jews? If they're Jews, they have to pay the tax. If they're not Jews, then they don't have to pay the tax, and then it's very clear to everybody, oh, those people don't have to pay the tax. They must not be Jews.
Christians back then were very small. What kind of numbers are you talking about?
So after 135, when the Gospels are starting to get published and circulated, they start growing. When Paul goes out to the pagans and starts recruiting,
right?
There's
you're talking 135 then.
At post 135.
Oh, okay. I think you were talking.
No, where I'm getting to is that by the time the Mishnah is published in, let's say, the year 200,
fine.
you have a number of different groups who are clearly not rabbinic Jews, but are trying to stake a claim to say, we have the truth. whether it's the Christians, the Essenes, the Dead Sea Sect, whatever group they were. There are lots of different people who are vying for we're in the right, and so it's important for Rebbe to put down in the Mishnah, well, what is the rabbinic version of the right way to be a Jew, right? If I've got the Gospels in the bookstore and I don't have any Jewish books, then it's gonna confuse the Hamonam, the regular population are not going to understand. Well, do we subscribe to that interpretation or do we not? So Rebbe needs to clearly define what's in and what's out. That is, it's a power move, right? For you to decide what is included in Torah Shebaal Peh and what is not is gives you a certain amount of power of deciding. You're the final arbiter of what gets into the Mishnah. It also comes with a lot of responsibility because you have to tolerate a certain amount of dissent, right? You can't just say, I'm only putting in Beis Hillel to the Mishnah and not Beis Shammai. We talked about the Mishnah in Edios was trying to explain why is there the minority opinion recorded in the Mishnah. The answer is because I want to make the tent as big as possible. I want to include all the rabbinic Jews. I want to exclude all the people I know I need to exclude, and I want to include all the people who I still want to have in the fold. But that can be very, very tenuous. And what's going to make it even more tenuous is the last statement in our Mishnah, and that's why I'm kind of circling back to Mishnah Aleph. So Moshe kibel Torah misina masar liYoshua, and we'll get to the last clause in a minute. Moshe gives the Masorah. We said what he's giving over is that ability to add to the Torah Shebaal Peh. He gives that to Yoshua, to the Zakenim, Nevi'im, etc. Until we get to the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, and they say three things. One is have a Mesunim Bedin, and we talked about how all the things that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah said are not really targeted for the average Joe. It's not for the accountant to be Mesunim Bedin. It's for the avos, the people who are part of transmitting the Masorah. And the second thing that they say is v'heimidu talmidim harbe. You should have a lot of students. So is that true? Should you have a lot of students? Does everybody agree that you should have a lot of students, or should you pick only the creme de la creme? Should you only teach the people who are at the top of the class, or should you open the doors to everybody?
Seems to imply that that's the correct thing, because Rabban Gamliel they rebuke him for that.
So we're going to get to that. Yes.
No, good point to that situation.
That what?
That they had to put in the benches.
Right, and then
right. So Reb Gamliel is the Nasi.
A vision like you're okay, Rabban Gamliel, but then the Gemara was like, yeah, they just showed him that to make him feel better.
Right. So what you guys are referring to is a little later on historically, that there seems to be two schools of thought. One is the Reb Gamliel school, the patriarch, who is more of the opinion that we're just going to teach the elite. And then the opinion of the other Chachamim were, no, we want as many students, midu talmidim harbe, right? We see that from the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. In Avos,
Hasidim take that very literally.
Yeah.
They all sit and learn.
That's right.
They don't have to serve young.
So in Avos to Rabbi Nassan, which we said is kind of, it's not quite the Gemara version of Pirkei Avos, but it's somewhere in between. And we mentioned there's two versions of this. So Nusach Beis, the second recension, they call it, in the fourth chapter, we get a commentary on Vehemidu Talmidim Harbe, which says as follows: Beis Shammai Omrim, Ein Shonen Ela L'Ksherim. Beis Shammai says you only teach the people who are kosher, meaning the students who are really appropriate to teach. Livnei Avos, the Livnei Bnei Avos, the people who are from the Avos, the children of the Avos, and their children's children, meaning you want to keep it within the aristocrats. Beis Hillel Omrim L'chol Adam, teach everybody. So that's the sort of commentary on what you're getting here in the Mishnah. Is you're getting Beis Hillel's approach and not necessarily Beis Shammai's. We're going to see where Beis Shammai comes into this whole discussion soon. The last clause of the Mishnah is v'osu siyag l'Torah. Make a, what is a siyag?
Fence.
Why not get there? Where do we get the word siyag? Where else do you see the word siyag?
The shtika.
Yeah, right. In Tehillim.
Yeah.
Okay, so we made the claim originally that these things that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah say are essentially of their own making, meaning there is nowhere necessarily in the Torah that it says have a Mesunim Medin. That's not a biblical thing. That is a rabbinic addition that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah added. Where did they get this idea of Susiyag LaTorah? So there is a verse which they don't quote
Okay, Shammai.
from Shammai, right? Shammai's got to get in here somewhere. So in Vayikra, Leviticus 18. I'm going to read actually the whole thing so you have the context. 18:30 is where we're going to get to, but we'll start with Yud Ches Chav Vav, Vayikra 18:26. Ushmartem atem es chukosai es mishpatai v'losasu mikol hatoevos ha'ela. So Hashem says that we had just finished listing all the arayas, the forbidden relationships, and now as a summary at the end of the parsha over here, the Torah says, but you have to keep my laws and my rules, and don't do any of the toivos ha'ela, the abhorrent things, the abominations. Ha'ezrach v'hager hagar b'sochachem, neither you, meaning the stranger, the sojourner, the citizen, as they translate Ezrach v'sochachem, ki es kol ha'toivos ha'el asu anshe ha'aretz asher lifnechem, because all these terrible things, the people who lived in Eretz Canaan, they're doing that, v'timei ha'aretz, and they're defiling the land. V'lo taki ha'aretz eschem. Don't do this, right? We started off in Chav Vav saying ushmartem, guard yourselves from these things. Don't do that because we don't want the land to vomit you out. V'lo taki ha'aretz eschem b'tam achem. Osa, if you make the land tamei, then it will vomit you out the same way it's doing for the nations that are there right now. Kasher ka'asa goy asher lifnechem. Anybody who does this, they get kares. And then we get to our pasuk. Ushmartem es mishmarti. Guard my guarding. Right? Levilti asos michukosa toevos asher na'asu lifnehem v'lo titame bahem ani Hashem Elokechem. So Chazal learned from there this language ushmartem es mishmarti, that you should make a mishmeret to my mishmeret. God tells you to guard yourself from this, and then he says guard the guarding. So the way you guard the guarding is by making a siyag, right? That's the drasha from those words. The challenge is that you've essentially made your source for the source for your authority is you're saying that you have a source for your authority, right? In other words, you say you have a Masorah. To darshan, the pasuk we just read should really, if I read it just from a simple understanding without any tosha bal peh, I would assume that it's a localized context. Be very, very careful about forbidden relationships, about doing the things that are going to get you thrown out of the land, that are abhorrent, that are toeva. It doesn't tell me that you can't eat fowl with milk, right? The Torah says, "Los vashel gediba chalevimo," and we don't eat chicken and milk. Why don't you eat chicken and milk? It's not in the Torah Shabbal Peh, right? It's not an explanation of the pasuk. It's not a halacha l'Moshe Misinai. It's a siyag. The rabbis came along and said, well, if we let people have chicken, which looks like meat, along with milk, they're going to confuse things. So we're going to protect the commandment by adding to it. We're going to make a siyag, right?
Right. How does that fall to us?
Well, yeah. How does any of that work? You're saying that you have the authority to do that because you have a Masorah that tells you that you have the authority to do that, right? It's self-perpetuating, and that's what
You can add things then when it's for protection.
you can add. Yeah, but you can
consider.
But
who
you can
defines-
argue anything that's protected.
who guards the guardians, right? Who decides what is protecting what? That's what all of these other groups took umbrage with. They understood you have to interpret the Torah, and maybe you have a different interpretation than mine, so we can have a machlokas. Why can't I have a machlokas with the tzaddukim? I can. The problem is less the few times where we disagree on how to translate the Torah. The problem, the thing that the Christians had a problem with, the thing that most of the other groups had a problem with, was this siyag, was this idea that the rabbis can come and say, this thing that the Torah did not say is forbidden, we're here to tell you it's forbidden, and we have the right to do that because we have the right to do that.
Why do you say the Christians have an issue with that?
What Jesus took to task was the rabbinic ordinances that were on top of the Bible. He has his own interpretation that is more lenient, let's say, but the rabbis interpret things in a different way in order to protect the biblical law.
Well, Paul's approach on it is completely different.
Yes, but I'm talking from Jesus's. We'll get to that. Maybe we'll save that for next time because I think we're going a little over time. Let me read you. I want to come back to your point. but I want to read to you a little bit from Larry Schiffman's Reclaiming the Dead Sea Scrolls. He says as follows: Pharisees and Sadducees. Not only can we understand the legal theology of the Qumran sect from the scrolls, we can also gather from them a great deal of information about the legal views of the Pharisees and Sadducees, supplementing what we already know from rabbinic sources in Josephus. What we learn about the Pharisees comes indirectly from the sectarian polemics against their views. So in other words, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the group at Qumran are complaining about how the rabbis are getting it wrong. So from there, we can infer that this is what the rabbis held. By evaluating the material carefully and then judiciously comparing the later evidence from Josephus and rabbinic tradition, we can reconstruct many Pharisaic attitudes. Here we're concerned not with the content of Pharisaic halacha, but with its basic theoretical underpinnings. That's our Mishnah. Admonition, which opens the Tzadokite fragments, includes a list of transgressions attributed to, and here's a quote from the Tzadokite fragment 4:19 through 20. The builders of the wall who followed, literally walked after the commander. The commander is the preacher about whom he, God, or the prophet said, and then they quote a pasuk from Micha. Okay, so all of that doesn't make any sense to you until you understand that when the Qumran group is talking about the rabbis, they refer to them as the wall builders. Why? Because the problem they had with them is that they're making a siyag, they're making a wall, they're making a fence.
They made bigger walls.
Their walls they felt are kosher. The rabbis' walls, right? Who are the builders of the wall? Who is the commander or the preacher? Clearly, they are the villains of the story. Buried in the text are two biblical allusions, etc. Okay. The sect regarded the Pharisees as preaching falsely and misleading their fellows by building the wall. The designation builders of the wall apparently derives from a concept found in the Mishnaic tractate Avos, generally known as Ethics of the Fathers. We talked about that, which instructs build a fence around the Torah. To build a fence refers to the Pharisaic rabbinic concept of creating more stringent laws than those found in the Bible in order to safeguard biblical laws from violation. For example, to uphold the Torah's prohibition against laborious work on the Sabbath, the rabbis and the Pharisees before them prohibited handling and even the implements used to do such work. Right? That's muksa. Although the Talmudic sources consider this a fence, a siyag in Mishnaic Hebrew, a positive feature of rabbinic halacha, the authors of the Tzadokite fragments, meaning the people of Qumran, opposed this approach, not only because they disagreed with the specific law that resulted, but also because they did not accept expanding the law in this manner in the first place. In other words, they don't hold that you can make a siyag l'Torah. How do you know that you can do that? They say. We disagree with the whole concept. So Rebbe
and their solution on that is to not have any fire.
That's the Tzedukim.
Yeah.
Right. They read the Bible literally as literally as they can.
With interpretation also.
Right. Yes, with interpretation also.
And Qumran, they also were very, very strict.
Oh yes. Yes. Especially about like relations.
Taharos.
Yes.
Much stricter than
Qumran means the Karaites, or
no, Qumran is the Dead Sea group.
Oh, that's a different group.
So it's a machlokas among the scholars. Are they the Essenes? Are they the Tzedukim? Or are they maybe a later incarnation of the Tzedukim, the Sadducees?
A lot of people say that they were a subsect of it.
The last point I'll mention
and because they were so into Taharos, they go nowhere. They disappear.
Right. No, for sure. To the sect, the very notion of adding laws to the divinely given laws of the Torah was forbidden. They permitted themselves to derive laws from the Torah only by means of inspired exegesis, discovering what they termed the hidden laws. So in other words, they have their own way of doing drashas. They also can't survive on reading everything completely literally, but they don't like this idea that the rabbis have essentially, from their perspective, given themselves the right to now add any sort of halacha that they want and call it a siyag. That is what leads Rambam, and I actually maybe we'll save it for next time because I want to get to Yechezkel, but that's what leads the Rambam to be so stringent and strident, I guess is probably a better word, in the importance of siyag and how if you violate it, you start leading into an area of splintering off from Judaism. We have a whole section of halachos in the Rambam about zaken mamre, right? A zaken mamre is one of the rabbinic colleagues who is not comfortable with relying on the majority position. They say, you know what? I have my own authority and I have my own perspective on this, and I'm going to paskin and I'm going to apply the law in my own way. Well, that's what led to all these different groups appearing. So we have to be very careful when we say, well, Rebbe's trying to keep in as many people as he can keep in. Yeah, but if someone starts acting like they're ready to split off, how do we do that? How do we keep them in while still allowing them to argue? That's going to be very tight rope to walk, and we'll see how Rambam talks about the halachos are in Hilchos Mamrim. We'll get to that
The Rambam
next
also
time.
lived